Israeli media reports say that the death toll from Saturday's attacks by Hamas have now passed the 900 mark. Now, that comes after about 100 more bodies were found in a small farming community near the Gaza border. Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu, he spoke earlier on television to the country, and he said that some Palestinian militants are still inside Israel and that the airstrikes against Gaza are just the beginning of a larger operation. He vowed earlier that his country's response to the attacks would, quote, change the Middle East. Israel has ordered a complete blockade of the Gaza Strip. It has mobilized 300,000 reservists.
Israeli tanks gather in fields outside Gaza. After the violent incursion and terrorist attacks by militant group Hamas, hundreds of thousands of Israeli army reservists answered the call to arms.
We are imposing a complete siege on Gaza. There will be no electricity, no food, no water, no fuel. Everything will be closed. We are fighting against human animals, and we are acting accordingly.
Hospitals in Gaza are already feeling the effects of the blockade. They're running out of critical supplies to treat the many injured by the ongoing strikes.
Unfortunately, the amount of medical supplies we need to deal with these injuries is insufficient. There just isn't enough, and some of the medicines are not available in the stores of the Ministry of Health. There's also the threat of running out of fuel and a power outage. Medical operations cannot be performed in emergency departments without fuel or electricity.
Israel says it is targeting facilities and headquarters of Hamas and jihad terrorist groups, but hundreds of civilians are being hit by the missile offensive across Gaza. Israel says the borders with Gaza will stay tightly closed, reinforced by tanks, while soldiers scour the south for Hamas fighters. But the rocket fire continues into Israel. And so does the aerial bombardment of the Gaza Strip. And Israel's Prime Minister says this is just the beginning.
I know that we all want immediate results. It will take time, but I promise you, dear Israeli citizens, at the end of this campaign, all of our enemies will know that it was a grave mistake to attack Israel. What we will do to our enemies in the coming days will reverberate with them for generations.
Fearing further infiltration by militants, Israel is also deploying troops and tanks along its northern border with Lebanon, shelling the area as they try to push back the threat. Hezbollah have been responding in kind. Israel now faces the very real prospect of a multi-front war, and the rest of the world can only watch and hope that that doesn't happen.
Well, I'm joined now by Adi Koplowitz. He's a political analyst and journalist based in Jerusalem. It's good to have you with us. The Prime Minister just said the Israeli response in Gaza is, and I'm quoting here, he said it was just the beginning. So do we know what the next step will be?
We don't know what exactly will the next step be. What we do know is that there is an unprecedented consensus in the Israeli society to allow the government and to allow the Israeli military to go as far as needed to the Gaza Strip to prevent anyone, not just Hamas, but any terror organization in the future from attempting anything similar to this. The voices I am hearing from Israeli society in the last few days, coming from all over the political range, including people who used to be human rights activists and leftists and right-wingers, everyone are saying the same things. If this government doesn't destroy Gaza, destroy Hamas to ashes, it is not legitimate and we will not forgive it. What's happening right now in the Gaza Strip is probably just the very beginning of a long war. Netanyahu used to be known as a relatively pragmatic leader when it comes to military operations, and even he now is saying words that we haven't heard from him in the past. Like, this is a response that will be remembered for generations. And it seems like, and I've been following Netanyahu for years, this time he might actually mean it.
Well, Adi, Hamas have now said that they would be open to negotiate a truce. Has there been any reaction from Israel?
There hasn't been any reaction from Israel for a truce, not an official one, not an unofficial one. The consensus in the Israeli leadership, in the Israeli military, and again, in Israeli society, is that Israel has all in. Now, this is based on the extremely high death toll that Israel has experienced in the last few days, a death toll which Israel hasn't seen relative to the pace it's happening since 1948, the year that Israel was founded. Saturday was one of the deadliest days in the history of the Jewish people since the end of the Holocaust. There is no way that anyone in Israel will agree for a truce, not in coming days, not in coming weeks, and not before Hamas is on the ground begging for a truce. I just don't see it happening right now.
You know, you said that you have been hearing calls across the political spectrum for Hamas, for Gaza to be destroyed completely. Earlier today, the military spokesperson for Hamas said that it will kill a civilian hostage each time Israel targets Gaza civilians without warning. Now, with that in mind, what options does Israel have if it wants to, one, destroy Hamas and at the same time save its own citizens?
That's an extremely difficult dilemma Israel is indeed facing right now, and I'm going to say something very tragic. I think a lot of people in Israel wish that killing the hostages was the worst thing Hamas can do. Unfortunately, we know that's not true. We're hearing today first reports of extreme, brutal sexual violence against the woman held hostage by Hamas. I'm sorry if it sounds very graphic, but that has to be known. And right now, the Israeli government has to maneuver between this extremely difficult situation, which starts to leak to the Israeli society, and the need to fight Hamas and encounter it. If there is any sort of negotiation for a humanitarian corridor that will allow at least women refugees who are sexually assaulted and raped by Hamas right now in the Gaza Strip, the Israeli government might take it. However, I don't believe it will make the Israeli government stop the offensive against the Gaza Strip.
And I'm wondering, Adi, do we know anything about negotiations that are maybe taking place via backdoor channels between Hamas, Israel, or maybe mediated by third parties? Do we know anything about possible talks this way?
So we have heard earlier today that there are attempts of talks between Israel and Hamas through the usual mediators being Qatar and Egypt. The offer, again, is to release women prisoners jailed in Israeli prisons in exchange for the women, children, and elderly people kidnapped and tortured by Hamas. It's unclear right now whether this will actually take place. It depends on the pressure that the Arab world will put on Hamas. And this humanitarian crisis that Israel is starting to intentionally and publicly create in the Gaza Strip might be a mean of pressure to make the Arab world pressure Hamas and tell them, take this chance for a humanitarian deal and then keep fighting Israel after that.
And what about the pressure being put on the Israeli government by the Israeli people? I mean, they must look at what has happened and see this as a total failure of their military intelligence.
This is something that is very present right now, but the Israeli society is focused on two things right now, on grief and the attempts to win over and reverse what has just happened. This is the worst military catastrophe Israel has faced since it was founded in 1948. There is no one in Israel who will disagree with this. This is understood. The main question now in Israeli society is how will the situation change? There is a lot of pressure on the government. And one of the biggest questions is, will there and how will there be a ground maneuver in the Gaza Strip with the intelligence collapsing completely? I know after speaking to sources that the Israeli military is rebuilding a lot of its forces, and the Israeli intelligence is making special efforts to prepare this maneuver.
Ani, let me ask you about what we have been seeing inside Israel in the past year. I mean, there have been mass protests. We know the country is politically polarized because of these judicial reforms that Netanyahu wants to see through. Many people say Israel society was split when it was called off guard on Saturday. Has that changed? And would you go so far to say that this polarization may have played a factor in weakening the country's defenses on Saturday?
There is no doubt that this polarization and the tensions within Israel tempted Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad to take what it saw as an opportunity and attack Israel. However, as soon as the attack took place, this polarization is something that the Israeli society has just put aside. Israel has gone through splits and polarizations for many, many years, and there's no doubt that the last year was extremely difficult in that sense. But I've seen how the people who organized the most massive and well-organized protest in Israel against the government during the last year used all their power and channeled all their infrastructure from driving people to protest to driving soldiers to the front, from buying food for protesters to buying food for military bases. There's no more question in the Israeli society about how resources should be used. They are all channeled by all the organizations taking part in the protest to help the military and to help the volunteers to win this war and to win Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad.
Ani, let me ask you about the role of Benjamin Netanyahu. There are people who could look at what has happened in the last year with this judicial reform row, and they could blame Netanyahu for dividing the country, maybe making the country show its Achilles heel to Hamas. Do you see that happening, or do you see Netanyahu maybe being able to rehabilitate himself instantly by the war effort now?
Well, there's definitely a lot less voices right now from both sides blaming each other for this split and for this showing of the Achilles heel, as you put it. Even people who used to criticize the other political side very loudly and in any circumstances are now more silent than before. However, there are still efforts that need to be made to take that polarization down. In the last few days, conspiracies have started to go in the Israelis' network, claiming that this whole failure was done by a treason, a stab in the back from a general who belongs to the left wing. And we still haven't seen Netanyahu denying that publicly, which would be very efficient to make that conspiracy go away and very much necessary for the Israeli society right now.
Journalist Adi Koplowitz in Jerusalem tonight with the latest on what remains a very volatile situation in Israel. Adi, thank you. Guido Steinberg is one of Germany's leading authorities on terrorism and geopolitics, especially Islamist terror in the Middle East. He has worked as an advisor on terrorism right here in Berlin at the Chancellor's office. He's here at the big table with me this evening. It's good to have you back here, Guido. We've heard from Israeli officials that this attack was Israel's 9/11 in Pearl Harbor all in one. We're still trying to get our heads around this. How did Israeli intelligence not see this attack coming?
Look at 9/11, look at Pearl Harbor, and you'll find complacency, arrogance, carelessness. And I think these are the main reasons. Although I wouldn't be too harsh on the intelligence services. Hamas is a professional organization, very ideological guys who can keep a secret. So you have to expect that even the best intelligence services don't find out everything about what is going on in the Gaza Strip. What I don't understand is why there was no army. I always thought that there was a full division protecting the border between Israel and Gaza, but I didn't see them. They weren't there. And so I think that the army leadership and the political leadership, they are the ones to be made responsible after everything has settled down.
And the last time we saw Israel suffer this kind of loss of life on Israeli territory in one day was back in 1948. I mean, this is new territory. Go down the list, if you would, with me. What has to be Israel's top priority right now, considering what has happened?
Well, first to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And I think it won't happen again in a long time, because something was terribly wrong in the Israeli body politic, in the army leadership, and perhaps in one or two of the intelligence services. Besides that, it is very hard to tell. I would say that it's paramount to bring the hostages back home. The Netanyahu government seems to have decided that it's more important to invade the Gaza Strip and end the rule of the Hamas terrorist organization over there. It's a conflict. It's a terrible conflict. I wouldn't want to have to take this decision, but I think the decision has been taken by the government and by the Israeli political elite in general.
Yeah, we're talking about a total blockade of Gaza, this siege of Gaza, the run-up to a ground invasion. We also have Israeli hostages, which we were talking about, who we assume they are inside Gaza. Many were taken at an outdoor music festival where Hamas gunmen killed as many as 250 people. We want to show you this report now about that music festival, and we want to warn you, some of these images may be disturbing.
Scenes of terror at a rave in the desert. Hamas terrorists opened fire on the crowds and chased people down, taking hostages. One woman said she hid in a citrus grove to stay alive.
And they were just all around me, and they were going tree by tree and shooting everywhere from two sides. And I saw many people, people were dying, all around.
This video shows a terrified young woman driven away on a motorbike by fighters, while her partner is marched away, his hands tied behind his back. The aftermath, hundreds of dead bodies, charred vehicles along the road. A few were lucky. This footage purportedly shows a hostage rescue, Israeli forces freeing people after a fierce gun battle with Hamas. Foreign nationals were also taken. One hostage's mother made an appeal from Germany.
We were sent a video in which I clearly recognized my daughter, she said, unconscious in a car with the Palestinians who drove along the Gaza Strip. I am asking for any news or help to please be sent to us.
Diplomatic efforts are underway to arrange a humanitarian corridor to evacuate women, children, and elderly hostages. But for now, relatives can only watch and wait.
We're talking about hostages here. I think the last time an Israeli soldier was taken hostage, I was looking at the numbers here. It took 5 years of negotiations, the release of more than 1,000 Palestinian prisoners just to get one Israeli soldier back. We're talking about 150 Israeli citizens now. You do the math. I mean, how do you get these people back safely?
Yeah, well, and there is something missing in this calculation. Last time it took the Israelis and the Germans and the Qataris and all those who mediated 6 years to get Gilad Shalit back back home. And we had other cases in the past where the ratio was somewhat similar. I think there is hardly any chance for negotiations to end this hostage crisis soon, especially now because there is this conflict. The government wants to show strength. It wants to show its ability to decisively beat Hamas. At the same time, it would like to free the hostages. I think that's impossible. And with everything I heard today from, for example, the official army speaker, I don't expect that all of these hostages will come back home.
Do you think, though, then, that the calls that we're hearing from across the political spectrum for Israel to annihilate Hamas in Gaza, that is more likely to happen than making sure that these hostages come back all alive, safe and sound?
Yes, absolutely. But at the same time, I think that the Israeli army and perhaps some friends will try to get as many hostages out of the Gaza Strip before or during the operations. And I think that's part of the reason why the Israeli buildup lasts so long. I think that the government in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem wants to make sure that every chance to free at least some of the hostages is being taken.
Hamas must have known that this attack would generate the kind of reaction that we're seeing now. So what's the end game then for Hamas? I mean, they know that they're about to face the fury of the military.
Well, it's mainly Gaza civilians who will bear the brunt of the attacks. And I think that that Hamas is arrogant as well, and that they simply rely on their 40,000, perhaps 50,000 fighters, including Islamic Jihad, to beat back the Israelis. At the same time, they hope that other allies in the region perhaps might intervene. I listened very closely to what the military head of the Al-Qassam Brigade said on Saturday. He addressed the Islamic Republic of Iran, he addressed Lebanon and friends in Iraq, in Syria, and Yemen, and called for their solidarity. He was very careful. It was not really a call for help, but I think that is what Hamas wants. It wants Hezbollah to intervene in this coming war from the northern border.
Adding to the complexity here, we've got the Israeli army. It's also hit targets in southern Lebanon. The Israeli military saying that it had shot several armed militants, we're seeing right here, who had tried to infiltrate Israel across the Lebanese border. The Shiite militant group Hezbollah says that it was not involved in that incident. But Hezbollah, they're certainly no friend of Israel. I mean, what's the danger of Hezbollah coming into this and then having a two-front war?
Well, first, I think that Hezbollah doesn't want to intervene. They have made this clear. They attacked Israeli targets, but in a very limited way.
And why wouldn't they want to intervene or get involved?
Simply because of the experience of the 2006 war, when Hezbollah kidnapped hostages, just like now, but only 2 or 3 dead soldiers. They kidnapped them and then were attacked by the Israelis in a way that threatened the very existence of the organization and destroyed major parts of South Lebanon. The organization probably doesn't want to risk this because of a Hamas operation that they are not a part of. But at the same time, the Israelis have already attacked today in southern Lebanon. They tried to hit Islamic Jihad targets present there, but they killed Hezbollah fighters. That's at least what Lebanese media report. So there is a certain danger of an escalation that is not wanted by Israel, which doesn't want a two-front war, and not by Hezbollah, which I think doesn't want this war right now.
Does this attack that we saw this weekend, does it have Iranian fingerprints on it?
A little bit. It's very, until now, we don't know anything about Iranian encouragement, but we do know that Iran knew about the attack beforehand, simply because Hezbollah in Lebanon knew about it, and Hezbollah is a part of the, let's say, Iranian orbit. At the same time, the Hamas missiles are Iranian missiles. Hamas training is Iranian training. Hamas financing is partly Iranian, so there are Iranian fingerprints all over. At the same time, there is no proof as yet that Iran is a part of this, that Iran decided or in any way influenced Hamas to attack Israel in this way. But I believe as soon as evidence is presented, then we might see a major conflagration, and that is probably why the American aircraft carrier is now moving towards the Eastern Mediterranean.
Let's talk a little bit about money. We've had a little bit of confusion tonight. The European Union earlier today said that they were going to stop all payments of development aid to the Palestinian territories, and they said no, they are going to continue those payments tonight. I asked a member of the Bundestag and a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Ralph Stegner, what he makes of this. Take a listen to what he said.
Well, I think it's very important that we don't finance anything that is misused for supporting terrorist attacks. On the other hand, humanitarian aid has been given for good reasons. And as long as it's only humanitarian aid, I think we should not completely give that up. But first and in the moment, I think that's the important thing to do after this very cruel attack, terrorist attack, that we really make sure that no money can be abused to support terrorist structures or anti-Semitism or anti-Israel sentiments or whatever.
Gita, that's the official line there. It's what it sounds like. We know that Hamas controls the Gaza Strip. If you're getting anything inside to the people, it's going to be filtered by Hamas. Doesn't the European Union know that? I mean, how can they be sure that the money that they're sending for humanitarian purposes is going to be used for humanitarian purposes?
They can't be sure. And that's part of the problem. At the same time, it's very important now to differentiate between Hamas and the Gaza population. Mm-hmm. That is, this here, according to my reading, is not a war. Mr. Netanyahu might want to differ, but it's a terrorist organization that has perpetrated a terrorist attack. Mm-hmm. And it's a minority in the Gaza Strip. We have seen demonstrations against Hamas rule in recent months. Mm-hmm. We don't know exactly how big the popular base of Hamas is, and we should differentiate. And if there is any suffering that we can alleviate by sending the most basic humanitarian aid, I think we should stick to it. If only just to make sure that we don't see this as a war against the Palestinians, but that it's a war, or if it's a war, that it's a fight against the terrorist organization Hamas.
Yeah, let's hope that cool heads will prevail through this. Kito, as always, we appreciate you coming to the studio, appreciate your excellent analysis. Thank you.
Well, Omri Ben Shushan was at that festival when the attack happened. Welcome to DW, Omri. How are you feeling now?
Now I'm feeling better. The experience that happened to me there was very terrible.
Would you mind?
And very not easy for me. For all the people.
I can absolutely imagine that. Would you mind just talking us through the moment it became clear on Saturday that something terrible was happening?
Okay, we start from the beginning. We was in the dance floor at the party, and we start see all the rockets that fired from Gaza through Israel. And, you know, we are the Israelis. This is a regular situation from us. This is not a very special thing that Gaza fired rockets to Israel. And after like 1 hour ago, they start to tell us that the terrorists go through Israel from Gaza by open back tenders like open back jeeps with guns and rockets and RPG and bombs and everything, and we start running and escape with the cars. When all the cars get to traffic stuck, we start to heard fire that the terrorists shooting on us, and we leave the cars and start running to the fields. Something like 400 people start running to the field, and it was
if I can just interrupt you there,
experience.
I'm sure it was. You've talked about a situation where you saw rockets coming across the sky, which you said was not unusual. Now we have hundreds of people driving down this road. The road is congested with cars, and you heard shots. Did you know what those shots meant when you heard them?
Yes, for sure. We know that it's not... we know that it is the terrorists, because they coming, like I said, in the back open jeeps. Okay?
Yes. And so when they came and you ran, what happened then?
And we ran into the orange field and hide under a tree, under an orange tree. Something like 6.5 hours. That's all over these 6 hours. We sound bombs and rockets and shooting from the terrorists that, pass over my head. So I heard the pow 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 with the whistle of the shootings. It was very scary. Something like 6.5 hours. Not nice moment.
And while that was happening, in that 6.5 hours, what were you thinking?
We just hide under the tree. We slept on the ground and just want to do not every sound, that the terrorists don't sound us, because if they sound me, they're gonna kill me. This is what's the feeling.
And so what made you think after 6.5 hours that it might be safe to move?
We don't know that it's safe to move. We still hear the shooting, but we meet an Israeli guy that say to us that he heard the Israeli military that call from the jeeps to all the Israelis to come. That is a safe jeep that gonna take there to the safe point, and we trust him because we know that he is Israeli. And when we search from the Israeli military jeep, something like 2.5 hours, that we escape in the field and try to move slowly and keep our heads, that the shoots don't hurt us.
And when did you realize the scale of this massacre? When did you realize that this was such a massive event?
From the first moments. So when you hear every some minutes shoots, when you hear every minute shoots, you know that every time you sound the shoots, someone of our guys falling down.
Right.
So
Terrible.
When you hear the shoots again and again and again and again, and you know that next time maybe it will be you.
Thankfully, it wasn't. Thank you so much for talking us through that terrible event. We wish you...
And I'm joined now by Tomer Shalom. He joins me from the Israeli city of Chidera, which is just north of Tel Aviv. His daughter and her best friend went missing on Saturday. So, Mayor, we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. We can only begin to imagine how difficult these circumstances must be for you. What can you tell us? What was your daughter doing on Saturday before she went missing?
My daughter, excuse me, you were asking what she was doing before?
Yeah, what was the last thing you heard from her?
Okay, the last time we heard from Noam and Bar, a friend, which is a German citizen also. They were in a party, like a peace festival, and we heard from her at about 8:30 in the morning. We've got a phone call. She was frightened, crying, and we could hear gunshots around. And she was saying that they were hiding in a kind of a shelter. And I was sure that it's gonna finish quickly, and I told her to stay calm and that they're in a safe place. And she didn't have a battery, so we hang up. And that was the last time we heard something from her.
Have you been able to try to reach her? I mean, is the battery still working on her phone? Have you been able to try to call her back?
She had a little more of battery after we spoke, and she was talking to a friend. And in that time, she assists some girl that had a gunshot hit in the leg. She helped her in the ambulance.
Okay.
And that was the last time where someone saw or talked to her. So she go from that shelter to the ambulance, and after that, nobody can tell us what happened.
Which maybe could be a good sign if she was there at the ambulance where the emergency services were. Have the police, have the authorities, have they been able to tell you anything about her whereabouts since that moment?
Well, the issue is that we don't know nothing. Nobody is having information to give us. So I don't know really what happened. I just trying to collect some stories, but we are in quite darkness about it, about what happened in that ambulance. My daughter, she's a paramedic, so she went to help. She went to celebrate, but she saw a gunshot. So I guess she was helping and assisting that that lady with a gunshot in the leg.
Yeah,
But I don't know more than that.
You know, here we are today. We're talking about war, talking about the military moving in possibly to the Gaza Strip. I mean, these are huge geopolitical stories. And here I am talking to you as a father who just wants to see his daughter again. How do you put all of these events in order in your mind right now? I mean, for people watching this, how would you explain how you're feeling?
Look, it's very clear for me. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is there, but I'm not talking about it. The things that happen, they are not related to that. They're related to a crime against humanity. This is way beyond war. It's innocent people, civilians, good people that are paramedic, that helping people, that go to volunteer in helping people. These people of peace, young people that are taken as a prisoner of war. This is I can not, nobody can understand that. This is way beyond war. This is should like everybody should worry from that. This is a real threat to the democratic world. How can this thing happen? Like I'm not. The political thing is not the issue. This is the humanitarian thing. I don't know where is the Red Cross, where is all the organizations.
Let me ask you before we let you go, if it's possible that your daughter sees this, and she can see you, what would you want to be the message to send to her?
I want to tell you that you should be strong as you are. I love you. Everybody here love you. We are all your friends here are everybody like really miss you, love you, and want you back in our place. Not just your parents, like everybody that know you and love you. We're waiting for you. We really, really want to see you and Bob and all the other prisoners. You're not supposed to be a war prisoner. You're not supposed to be here. I hope for you that you're gonna see your family soon.
Tomer Shalom, joining us tonight from Chidera in Israel. Tomer, I'm sure that there are a lot of people who are wishing you and your daughter and your family all the best tonight. Thank you for sharing your story with us.
Thank you.
Well, I want to go now to Gerald Feierstein. He's a former U.S. ambassador and an expert on counterterrorism at the Middle East Institute in Washington. He joins us from Philadelphia. It's good to have you with us. I hope I got the pronunciation of your last name correct, sir. If not, please correct me and forgive me there on that.
That was very good. Thank you.
Okay. There are reports that Hamas is threatening to kill some hostages if Israel continues to bomb civilian buildings in Gaza. How serious are these threats?
Well, I think that they should be taken very seriously. I think that Hamas sees holding hostages to be an important advantage that it has over the Israelis right now in terms of limiting Israel's freedom of action to respond to what happened on Saturday. So these kinds of threats, you should assume that they would be willing to carry them out if Israel continues with its military response.
What strategy is Hamas pursuing in its attack on Israel? I mean, there are reports that it's prepared to talk about a possible truce now.
Well, I think that this is, this is a very typical kind of scenario between the Israelis and Hamas. Of course, the scale of this is hugely different from what we've seen in the past. But Hamas would like to take advantage of the surprise in Israel and the disarray in Israel in order to achieve some tangible result going forward, whether that's the release of Palestinian prisoners or other kinds of things. And of course, all of this also has a domestic Palestinian context in the sense that Hamas would demonstrate an ability to achieve results that the Palestinian Authority couldn't achieve.
You know, there are calls across the political spectrum tonight in Israel for the military to go into Gaza and to completely annihilate Hamas. Is that a realistic option at this moment, considering the fact that we're talking about maybe as many as 150 Israeli hostages there in the territory?
You know, you can't eliminate a group like Hamas. If the Israelis were able to eliminate Hamas, they would have done it a long time ago. The reality is that Hamas is embedded in the population, and as much damage and destruction as Israel can do, they can't eradicate a movement like that. I think, again, there is no military solution to this. I can understand why the Israelis would want to talk about this, but really the only way that we're ever going to change the reality on the ground is by negotiation and compromise.
We, so far, have not had any word on a ground incursion by the Israeli military. I mean, do you expect that to change? Do you expect that to be forthcoming? Or do you think exactly what you said, that the powers that be realize that negotiations are the only way here now?
Well, unfortunately, I think that rational thinking isn't at the top of the agenda right now in either Israel or the Palestinian territories. Each side is operating on the basis of emotion, on the basis of how it perceives the current situation. The question about negotiations is going to be afterwards. I'm afraid that we're going to see a continuation of military action for some time to come. I certainly wouldn't rule out the possibility of a ground incursion.
And what about these reports that we've had today of Israel and possibly Hezbollah exchanging fire in the north there with the border with Lebanon? How worried are you about this becoming a two-front conflict?
I think that Hezbollah would certainly like to demonstrate that it is supporting Hamas, that it is part of the entire confrontation with Israel. But the Hezbollah leadership has generally been cautious, and I think that they understand that the Israeli response would be harsh and swift.
Gerald Feuerstein from the Middle East Institute in Washington, we appreciate your time and your valuable analysis tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Entered the north of the country from Lebanon. Israel has also begun to shell areas in southern Lebanon, reportedly causing some casualties. Israel says it's also deploying helicopters. Lebanese authorities have called on people in the area to exercise caution as shells hit the outskirts of villages in the area. Let's bring in DW's Beirut Bureau Chief, Mohammed Traiter. Welcome, Mohammed. What more can you tell us about these Israeli claims?
Well, Phil, let me start with the latest developments from Lebanon. A member of Hezbollah reportedly died in Israeli shelling on Lebanese territory this afternoon. This could be a dramatic development on the Lebanese front. The heavily armed group has been very clear about the retaliation and revenge in such cases. Now, the ease on the Lebanese-Israeli borders that lasted until this morning was breached in the afternoon. The Israeli army said it had killed infiltrators from the Lebanese borders. Al-Aqsa Brigade, the armed wing of the Palestinian Islamist organization, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, claimed responsibility for the operation later. Now, this operation was followed by intense shelling from Israelis into Lebanese territory. Additional deployments are being spotted now on the borders, troops and tanks from the Israeli side.
Right, so there are these international calls for the violence not to spread, but already it looks like it's spreading. And of course, there are fears that Hezbollah could attack Israel from Lebanon in support of those Hamas attacks. What has Hezbollah been saying?
Well, we know so far that Hezbollah is intentionally leaving the situation open to all scenarios. His leadership was clear about not standing neutral in this battle. So far, the escalation on the Lebanese front was limited. Even the killing of a Hezbollah member, the retaliation may be within the known rules of engagement with Israel. But what guarantees that the existing status quo will last on the border? I would say only Hezbollah has the answer for this. The group has its own assessment and agenda. And although Hezbollah is part of the government in Lebanon, its military actions are never discussed in the cabinet.
OK, thank you for that, Mohammed Traitor, Beirut Bureau Chief. Thank you so much.